Welcome to Platform Diaries with Shane Williams, where each fortnight you'll hear the stories of industry veterans and learn the secrets to sustainably amplifying value from your software platform investments.
Welcome to episode 2 in my series on maximising value from your SI relationship. You're listening to Platform Diaries and I'm your host, Shane Williams. Today I'm speaking with Brendan Connolly. Brendan is Head of Technology Sales at Accenture, Australia and New Zealand. Brendan is an economics grad from a small town in Ireland called Leixlip. Brendan enjoyed a career travelling the world doing implementations of SAP and Siebel in some of the world's largest companies, before moving into Australia and joining Accenture in a sales role. We discuss fresh approaches to RFPs, how to empower your procurement team, and collaborating on commercials. I trust you'll enjoy the interview. Brendan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Shane. It's awesome to be here.
So today we are on episode 2 in my short series on getting the best value out of your SI and or partner, if you want to call it that, relationship. And as someone who I've known for a number of years in the ecosystem, I thought I'd like to get your perspective on this. So thanks for joining me. I might just dive straight in and get you to talk to us just briefly on your journey and your career journey, because I think I'll get a lot of feedback from listeners that they kind of like that whole scene setting thing and learning about the people. So if you can tell us a little bit about that, and particularly because we're going to talk about partner today, what it is you do now and how that plays out into making you the best person to be here today.
Sure thing. And I'm thrilled to be here after so long. I was talking so long about this. My journey started, I'm an 80s kid from Ireland. I grew up in a small town in Ireland, best known, by the way, as the home of Guinness, where Guinness was first brewed. And in the 80s, it was better known as where Intel and Hewlett-Packard set up their European headquarters. So we had our own very little Silicon Valley in Leixlip in County Kildare. And I think I did a degree in economics in university. And after that, I kind of thought, I really don't want to work in a bank or finance for the rest of my life. So jumped on a postgrad in information technology. And that just absolutely opened up my mind to a whole different world. So I journeyed around the world, as many technology people do, with their technology passports. I was an SAP guy in the early days and rapidly got into a program manager kind of role across big, meaty implementations. So global SAP rollouts for pharmaceutical companies, global Siebel rollouts, and really enjoyed all that big, meaty, difficult type programs. And today I am in a sales role in Accenture. So I look after technology sales for Australia and New Zealand in Accenture. So it's taken me 5 years to be comfortable with the fact that I am a sales guy. But like I tell everyone I meet, I wasn't born a sales guy. And those 16 years of working with partners and in the delivery trenches are a major part of my partnering credentials today.
It's an interesting one. I almost feel like doesn't matter what role you're in, doesn't matter what company you're in, client side, whatever, everyone's a salesperson, right? You just don't necessarily call yourself that. But I also feel like when I first got into working for myself and I had to flip the switch on, you know, the irony of expertise, right? Been working with salespeople for years to help them go through the CRM journey and understand it, and being the, I'll tell you how to do this, and now you got to do it yourself, and you got to put the mirror back in yourself and go, oh, hang on.
Yeah.
Oh, this is harder than it looks. But I reckon everyone's a salesperson, even if they're not in sales. So it's interesting seeing you come from that. Yeah, it's probably why we get along so well. It's that, you know, I've done delivery, I've been in the trenches, I've done this before, and now I've come out to how do I do this? How do I enable other people to get this right? Maybe that's the crux of being a partner.
Yeah, that's right. And I think about a classic quote from the movie Glengarry Glen Ross that a lot of people think about, you know, the quintessential 1980s sales movie and remember Alec Baldwin and his always be closing kind of mantra. But there's a quote from that says, you know, the idea is not to sell one person a car one time. It's to sell somebody 3 cars over 15 years. And that's the essence of partnership, right? people who keep coming back to you, people who want to engage you. So what I love about my role is that the clients who I implemented Siebel with in 2003, 2004 are the same clients that I implemented Salesforce with in 2010, 2011. So I think that's a really strong indication of a deep partnership and a deep trust.
Now, it's interesting talking about partnership and trust. If you think about, for transparency with the listeners, right? So we crossed paths well before your days in Accenture, and you were already working with the organisation. I was working in a different part of the organisation. We crossed paths, and yet in the preceding decade, I don't think I've ever bought anything from you.
That's right. We came close once or twice, but and I think that's okay too, because first of all, there's no one size fits all partner, and there's various different things that I can do as a partner. So you and I call each other all the time and ask questions, and you might pick up some things from me, and equally I learn a little bit from you. So that's partnership without a commercial contract or us having been through the trenches. But yes, I was with a different organization. You then moved on. What I love about that whole experience is I'm still partnering with that organization you were in way back when we first met. So it's a nice journey.
Speaking about partnership, it took me to get out the door for you to win the business. There you go.
You were the blocker all that time.
I was the blocker. There you go. There's something in that. We should explore that another time. So I want to start today kind of where I went. I went on a bit of a diatribe in the last episode talking to Lee Siamas from IBM, and I got some interesting feedback on it. So you'd probably remember from listening to it, I had a rant about the usefulness of RFPs. So I'm going to stick with that theme today because let's say some people in certain communities were up in arms about me throwing mud, and others were very much in the tent of you need to dive into this more. So I'm going to follow the latter and probably upset the former. So I'm going to hit you with this, right? Which is, I think the RFP has kind of hit its use by date. And I don't necessarily think that we've solved what's the alternative, because I think there's a few. But I want to know, where do you stand on this one?
Well, you and I have spoken about this a little bit before as well. And I think my view is the RFP process needs to change. I do not believe procurement people and sourcing people wake up every day excited by the prospect of facilitating an RFP process. And I think if organizations can empower procurement to try different things, to approach the partnering and the sourcing process in a different way, I think we would all, both customers and partners, I think we would all benefit. And when I think about sourcing and procurement, I think there are 4 things that procurement needs to satisfy. Right? Number 1 is capability driven. They need to be confident that the partners they engage have the capabilities they need. Number 2 is around solution. Does the partner's solution or offering address the business needs? Number 3 is around price. Does the price represent fair market value? And then 4 is all about compliance. Has the sourcing process met all the compliance needs? Now, this might sound a little bit self-serving, but I'm certain that those 4 things can be satisfied without going through the traditional RFP process.
I agree for what it's worth. And I'm not sure that a bunch of people spending a lot of time filling in a spreadsheet is the best way to answer those 4 things.
Yeah, absolutely. We have, the good thing is the future is here, right? There are organizations trying new things because businesses agree with what you've just said. The problem is it's here, but it's just not evenly distributed, right? So for every one pioneering business that tries something new, I think we have to recognize that others are still sticking with the process, but it's happening. And the example I have is of one large client that we've worked with recently where they executed an interactive RFP, right? So they didn't start out with the 200-page briefing document and the spreadsheet with 10 tabs to populate. They started out with just a very light briefing deck, and they engaged 3 partners to go on a journey with them over 8 weeks of workshops, co-collaboration workshops, where we talked about the interests, the needs of the business, talked about the legacy platforms and architecture, talked about their vision for talent, their vision for their business and their IT organization. And through those workshops, solutions some new capabilities to meet their demands or meet their needs. And we iterated over, it was very intense, but iterated every week. And on a Monday morning, we would play back where we got to around the solution and the outcome. And eventually through that process, they down selected. So over 8 weeks, very intense 8 weeks, we went from very light briefing deck to a very deep proof of concept around the new platform, get through the award process, and then we go through the same workshopping around commercials. Now, that was much, much lighter touch for that organization than spending 6 months or 3 or 6 months building out the briefing deck, engaging a partner to help them with that, engaging third-party advisors, all that kind of front-loaded activity. And it was a much more enjoyable process for us because they get to know us and we get to know them through the conversation. So it wasn't arm's length. It was direct engagement. We're all understanding each other's working style, collaboration style. We're all challenging each other. And you start to build that camaraderie before you get going on what is going to be a challenging and difficult program.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I think it's kind of like, I've got a question, then I'm going to make 2 statements. First one is, when you talked about we come in for the briefing and then we go through a series of workshops, was that all partners in the room for the briefing, or did you all get your own individual?
Individual in that case. And frankly, I think individual works best. You know, yesterday I was on a very traditional briefing call where there were 45 people from various partner organizations on the call. And I understand why organizations do the broadcast briefing, because you want to make sure that there's consistency in communication and so forth. But it is very arm's length. It is very artificial. In any partnership, if you think about any other buying scenario, you want to create a direct engagement, a direct dialogue to make sure that there's a common understanding, there's a relationship and a bond starting to build. Frankly, I don't think you get that in the broadcast situation.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Because I was thinking about that going, well, how do you make sure that it's an even playing field and everybody gets the same info? And our second part of that was client side. That largely means over 8 weeks with 3 partners, granted you're whittling it down, but in your first engagement session, you're running 3 probably day to half day workshops. And then, so there's a lot of, I guess, investment on the client side that would need to go into that. That's not necessarily investment you would put in a typical spreadsheet. The alternative to that is, depending on, if you're going to put effort in, what's the better outcome? One of it is you put a bunch of effort into a spreadsheet. And the other one is you put a bunch of effort into working with some smart people from getting various different perspectives on your problem. And so I'm thinking from the client side, you're probably going to end up with a deeper understanding of your own problems in your business by being challenged and asked by various people.
Exactly right. And Shane, I think you've hit the nail on a very important point here. There's an old adage that says you're not one person, you're actually 3 people. You're the person you think you are. You're also the person others think you are. And then there's the person you really are. Now, when I get an RFP briefing deck, that is the client describing the person, the organization they think they are. We then, through the lens of the response, put forward a solution and a response based on who we think they are and what they need, our interpretation of the needs. And then through the program, when you're in the trenches, when you're having the deep and meaningful, back and forth, that's when you find out who the organization really is. So what happens in the agile or the interactive RFP process is you get to that third dimension quicker. And I think you benefit from it by virtue of that closer interaction, that more deep and meaningful challenging each other, understanding what you mean by disruption, what you mean by transforming your business, what you mean by becoming an agile organization. That is what you get to quicker and more effectively through a more interactive one-on-one type process.
So that's interesting. I think I'd love to explore that a bit more. I don't want you necessarily to name the client, and I don't know how far into that journey they are, but do you feel like, because I could see a benefit here where you go, I've been through this process, and just from a commercial perspective, right, you don't end up spending the first quarter of the program with everybody understanding the problem, getting in a shared understanding, and then realizing that what you asked for is not what you need. You kind of hit the ground running with, we've already explored that. We sort of know what it is we actually need. We kind of got a shared understanding of where we're going, and we can get into things quicker. So from a speed and commercial perspective, that seems to make a lot more sense to me. But I'd love to know, that's all theoretical, right? So are you down the path far enough with this client that you could say, yes, it definitely, once the project started, it put us in a better position than we might have been otherwise?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And this program is a very large program. It's integrating and consolidating 3 legacy ERPs into a next generation cloud ERP. It's really hard going, right? But again, I think you get to that point where you trust each other quicker. I think you get to the point where you can challenge each other quicker. And for me, it means you get to the point of trust a lot quicker. And when I think of the difference here, there's the traditional RFP process sometimes feels like the marketing and selling a house, right? When the real estate folks come in, they take pictures of your house, they airbrush those pictures, they represent your house in the best, most amazing way. Now, it's still your house, and people come in and they fall in love with the house. But when I bought my last house, I fell in love with it. And then when I moved in and all the furniture was gone and everything, you start to see the cracks and you start to see the things you don't like. That's how I sometimes feel the journey goes in a traditional RFP process. But again, when you pull people together quicker, you don't airbrush anything. So if you spend 6 weeks with me, Shane, and you don't like my engagement style, you don't like the challenges that I put to you, you say, hey, no, you're just not getting it. You drop me out of the process. You do not find that out in a traditional process.
Yeah, I guess you don't flip through an app on your phone and go, yep, there's my husband, done.
That's right.
Making the decision based on the numbers that they've punched into the system, right? You go, nah, let's go and have a conversation. Let's go to know each other a bit.
That's right. That's right. And equally, through the iterative commercial process, you forego all that tension of traditional engagement around MSAs and SOWs, right? I've had such fun doing a co-collaboration statement of work with a client, right? Using agile principles to build a SOW, to talk about, hey, what are your interests? Here are my interests in a SOW. Let's build a document together. Now, that is something you can do to demonstrate agility, to demonstrate co-creation, and to really prove to yourself and prove to the client that, hey, this is the kind of situation we're going to be in through the course of a project. Now, are we serious about co-collaboration and challenging each other? Or are we going to be arm's length and invest all this time in a document that describes the worst outcome that we could possibly get to?
In case of emergency, break glass.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah. Which is probably a good segue into the next diatribe I went on to in the last conversation, which was rate cards. And I think they serve a purpose. If you, as a client, own the outcome, are responsible for the delivery, and you're asking the partner to supply humans, then it probably serves a purpose, right? How much am I going to have to pay for these people per day? But I don't think there's a lot of leverage in you shouldn't be bothering necessarily too much negotiation on day rate, because you're asking for the best people. If you want the best ones, you pay the current market rate, right? And if you're dealing with most of the SIs, they kind of know what the running rate is anyway, yeah? But I think beyond that, I'm not sure that they add an infinite amount of value when you want a nickel and dime on day rates for particular types of resources. And I get these are massive programs and there's, $10 a day here adds up. But I also feel like there would be more value in talking about value rather than cost in certain respects. But I'd love to know, where do you stand on this one? When you're talking about, let's create our SOW together, let's talk about what we're trying to get out of this in a scenario where, I'm looking for, in your case, Accenture to come in and help me realize this, objective or outcome or new market or something. How do you co-create a rate card, mate?
Well, there is definitely a place for a rate card in a commercial agreement. In the context of engaging with a new client, we'll always try to, before we talk about the project, we'll always try and get a sense of the interests that client has, right? Truly, what are your interests? And I might be going off on a tangent here, Shane, but it amazes me sometimes when we sit down with clients in a room, in a workshop or in a presentation, how many clients will make reference to the fact that this is the first time that this group has been together, right? It's startling. So when I say, we try to understand the interests, that's not a trivial thing. But we try to, when we get a sense of the interests, that helps us shape a commercial conversation around outcomes. And we say, okay, well, if you want us to demonstrate skin in the game, if you want us to show true partnering commitment, we can forego that P times Q daily rate type conversation, and we can stake our commercial outcomes on your business outcomes. And we can do that via agreeing a set of leading indicators or agreeing a set of outcomes, whichever is easier. Then you go down the route of capacity models, of fixed price models, and so forth. But often, no matter where we get to on outcomes or different commercial creativity models, the client will always want a fallback, a P times Q fallback on rates. And I think that's a good thing, because we might want to flex in certain areas for a short period of time. We might need to flex with a rate card. We don't necessarily co-create the rate card, bottom-up cost-plus model or anything like that. But we work with the client to figure out what onshore-offshore mix are you comfortable with? What type of seniority do we need in this team to model the pyramid for the team, and ultimately get to a rate card that is acceptable, is market relevant, is benchmarkable, is fit for purpose, and we go from there. The rate card doesn't need to go away in commercial models. I think we are moving more and more towards price per scrum team in an agile context, outcomes in bigger, ambitious organizations where it makes sense. But I'm really comfortable with the rate card staying, and I don't think it's going anywhere soon.
No, I don't think it's going anywhere. I guess my point is, I don't like the focus on that being the SOW conversation, right? I'd rather the conversation be about what outcome you're looking for and what do you think is a reasonable investment to achieve that outcome. And if we can talk about that, then it's not, you don't need a rate card in there, right? Because at some point, someone's got, like me, who's running a team, is going to sit there and go, all right, I've just been asked to add in an additional amount of scope. How do I work out what that's roughly going to cost me? Well, I know it's probably going to be a squad of 6 people and it's going to be this much mix, smells about this amount of number. Your rate card's useful for that in unders and overs, or if I need to pause, how much can I save, and add things like that. But I used this analogy last time, right? If you're coming in to paint my house, have I got $1 million property or a cheap rental that I just need cleaned up? And what do I think is a reasonable amount of money to spend to paint my $1 million property or my cheap rental? And based on the value conversation, I think that's a reasonable expenditure. But I'm not sitting there with the painter going, mate, you're paying too much for those brushes. Nah, not good enough. Nah. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think we're in a really interesting space right now where more and more organizations are trying to look and build operating models of the future, more agile delivery teams, right? And so many more of our engagements involve a training and enablement part of them, right? So recently, in a very traditional manufacturing client of ours, we trained 50 people in their organization on agile practices. I got them certified in safe agile, got them up and running in an entirely different vertical delivery model, right? So we got them going from classic waterfall to agile. Now, the thing we didn't do, and the thing I think we need to do to enable that future that you talk about, is get all the executives on that journey too. So we have a saying in Accenture that every business is a technology business. And that means we got to get our CFO and our COO and our CIO on that same safe training, right? They need to understand what's different. Because when it comes to persistent funding of Scrum teams, you want a CFO to be very comfortable with the new way of working and to demonstrate that trust that, hey, I'm going to outlay $1 million, and through this agile model that is far more productive, that will deploy far more value quicker, we're going to see a better return. And right now, I don't know if organizations, or CFOs in organizations and people who approve the budgets are there yet. So until they are, we're going to still have the P times Q discussion.
And it's interesting because I did an entire chapter on exactly this, right? Which is, how do you have the conversation about perpetual teams delivering value versus this ebbing and flowing of approval of funding? And how do you describe the impact that has on your ability to deliver when you've got to let a team go, let all the context walk out the door, spin up a new team, create all the context again? And the other thing you talked about, which really resonates for me, is this idea of it's not just about your partner coming in to deliver a technology solution, right? It's you guys walk in the door, and most of the partners are the same, with a methodology, right? This is how we deliver software, or this is how we deliver outcomes. And that means we structure teams a certain way, and we have certain ways of working, and we, this is how we deliver. In your case, you talked about, scaled agile, right? But I think there's absolute value in that. It's not necessarily, if you're starting out, if this is a first implementation for the business or some sort of transformation program, then the beauty of the partnership is you're not just buying the outcome, but through the process of delivery, you're upskilling your team, you're adopting ways of working, which are going to enable you to move forward and continue to deliver value with or without the partners being in the room, right? Ideally, it's probably for you guys a blended mix, but that doesn't necessarily mean it needs to land that way. But the DNA of what you've delivered is greater than just the sum of the outcome, right?
Absolutely. And that's at the heart of, it feels like a bit of a cliche when you talk about co-creation and blended teams, but we love that. We love that feeling of creating one team, creating an identity that is not Accenture, is not the client, it's blended. And we get so much out of that. Our teams love working in environments like that. They love being part of something new, making an impact. So it gets back to that whole thing. When you partner, what are you looking for? Is it a cost play only? And if it is, that's fine. But are you looking to do something different? Is it in the context of a business disruption play? Are you going like Belong and Telstra with Belong? Are you going and creating a digital native offering? Are you going into new markets? Are you seeking to build talent? What is your IT operating model of the future, right? Because we can, with clients, like I said, we can train, we can pollinate different teams. Like we can learn from each other and really drive outcomes that are way, way beyond just the project, right? So in the best agile teams, I think that purpose and that intent lives way beyond the initial objective of the project.
I could keep talking about this all day, and I've got a few other things that I would love to dive into, but we're up on time. So I always like to end each episode with, some takeaways that listeners could, execute with, if you like, or maybe something to think about. So I'd love your perspective, mate. The three things you want or you think that execs should be taking away from today about how to engage with a partner.
We could talk all day about this. I think there's three things, right? There's number one, I would suggest try and keep a very open mind to collaboration and co-creation. So in most buying scenarios, people's minds are made up before they engage with suppliers. Try and keep an open mind, because with different perspectives, with different experiences, you could end up in a really interesting space if you do keep that open mind. The second one is that point around aligning the business, right? It isn't trivial. And if it comes from the top, it's much, much easier to keep everyone aligned, right? I often think if you got 5 people in a room and said, hey, I'm going to give you a free car each, the only catch is you all need to agree on the same car. Imagine how difficult that would be, right? Because you might want a sports car, I might want an SUV. That is infinitely more difficult when you have people from lots of different business functions, lots of different parts of the organization, global people, local people. But getting that alignment right at the top is so, so important. And then number 3, when things do go wrong, when things get complex, trust the partner to get in a room with you and work through it, right? The more complex things get, the more we have to simplify, the more we have to strip things back. We don't need 22 people in a room. We might only need 3 people in a room to figure our way out of it. And having the right partner there in the trenches with you when things go wrong, that is a really, really important part of climbing back out and getting to the other side.
So you reckon a strong enough relationship where you can get in the room and have a robust conversation with a view to finding an outcome rather than snotting someone?
Absolutely right. What I hate, my pet peeve, is escalation calls with 200 people on them. I love an escalation session with 2 or 3 people talking about what went wrong, talking about what got us there, and talking about the path out.
Oh, I imagine everyone prefers that. Unless, of course, you just want to make a point. You're making a statement. I don't know how much value it adds, but there you go. Mate, thank you for your time. As always, if anybody wants to reach out to your wonderful self, how should they get in touch, mate?
Brendan.Connolly@Accenture.com. I'd love to chat to anyone about this topic. It's a very passionate topic of mine. So, I'd love to hear from anyone who wants to chat more.
Thanks, mate. We'll talk again soon. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Awesome. Thank you, Shane.
You've been listening to Platform Diaries with Shane Williams. For more information or to contact Shane, please visit shanewilliams.com.au. Until next time, thanks for listening.